death of Emmett Till is an important episode in the modern civil rights movement. When you talk to people of that era, particularly the students involved in the movement, they identified with Emmett Till because they were the same age as Emmett Till. So when they were 13 and 14, when Emmett Till was killed, they're 17, 18, and 19 in the 1960s. In terms of galvanizing their energies and in terms of motivation, they were motivated by that identification with Emmett Till.
Right? The classic kind of murder that been taking place across the South. Black people making some comment towards white people that got them killed. I call it genocide, where people are trying to kill African Americans because simply they were black. You
see how badly mutilated his body was facing, how that disfigures him in a way that shocks this nation and shocks the sensitivity of a generation of activists that are going to have an important impact on the trajectory of the civil rights movement.
Nobody had been brought to justice for killing him, even though back then that was a trial. At that particular time, nobody was convicted.
On May 17, 1954, the United States Supreme Court handed down its ruling on the landmark case of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, where a parent challenged the current school board because the city's white schools were much better than that same city's schools for black children. As a result, now schools could be characterized as separate but equal public facilities. In doing so, separate educational facilities were said to be unequal were diminished. This decision helped break the back of state-sponsored segregation and as a result, provided one of the initial sparks of the civil rights movement that would lead to the world that we know today. Rosa Parks, otherwise known as the mother of the civil rights movement, was born on February 4, 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama, and unfortunately passed away on October 24, 2005, in Detroit, Michigan. On the afternoon of December 1, 1955, in the city of Montgomery, Alabama, she refused to give up her seat to a white passenger because, and I quote, she was tired of giving in. Her actions resulted in her arrest and her eventual imprisonment. 4 days later, she was found guilty of violating segregation laws and as a result was fined. Her courageous act resulted in an explosion in the black community of Montgomery. Ads were placed in local papers and handbills were printed and distributed in black neighborhoods. Members of the African American community were asked to stay off city buses on Monday, December 5th of 1955, which was the day of Rosa's trial, in protest of her arrest. People were encouraged to stay home from work or school, take a cab, or walk to work. With most of the African American community not riding the bus, organizers believed a longer boycott might be successful. The city's buses were, by and large, empty. Some people carpooled and others rode in African American operated cabs, but most of the estimated 40,000 African American commuters living in the city at the time had opted to walk to work that day. With the transit company and downtown businesses suffering financial loss and the legal system ruling against them, the city of Montgomery had no choice but to lift its enforcement of segregation on public buses, and the boycott officially ended on December 20th, 1956. The combination of legal action backed by the unrelenting determination of the African American community made the 381-day Montgomery bus boycott one of the largest and most successful mass movements against racial segregation in history.
Coons here, huh?
What are you doing here?
Say coons. Whites on.
You don't belong here.
Does it say coons here, huh?
What are you doing here?
Does it say coons? No, this is white.
You belong here. Oh.
What are you reading? I didn't know niggers could read. What are you, stupid? You're a nigger lover? Look at me! Look at me! Disrespectful monkey car. Huh? You understand?
And you? Stop it! And you? What are you doing here?
Get up! Get up, you nigger! Look at me! Look at me!
Is that up there or is that here?
Look at me!
What is this?
You don't have to tell me, but you have to decide.
That's where you came from.
Do you want some coffee?
Nonviolent protests and sit-ins made the backbone of the civil rights movement. After much persuasion from various civil rights leaders including MLK, Americans all over the nation began peaceful protests where they pleaded for equality. Even though many were harassed and often beaten, the individuals who took part in these sit-ins surprisingly were able to keep their cool and not fight back with violence. James Meredith is a civil rights activist who became the first African American to attend the University of Mississippi in 1962. After graduating high school, spending the next 9 years in the Air Force before enrolling and graduating from Jackson State College in Mississippi, in 1961 he applied to the all-white University of Mississippi where he was admitted, but later denied when administration realized he was a black minority. Because all public institutions had been ordered to accept minorities following the Brown v. Board ruling, Meredith filed a suit alleging discrimination. The case made it all the way to the Supreme Court where the ruling came in his favor. When Meredith arrived at University of Mississippi to register for classes on September 20th, 1962, he found the entrance blocked. As a result, rioting erupted and the Attorney General Robert Kennedy sent 500 U.S. Marshals to the scene. Meredith graduated with a degree in political science in 1963. He went on to receive a master's degree in economics at the University of Idanna in Nigeria and a law degree from Columbia University in 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. is arguably the most recognized and associated individual with the civil rights movement. His efforts to create a race-blind society where all were equal and where there was no segregation led him to becoming one of the main members of the civil rights movement. In 1957, he was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was an organization which was formed to provide new leadership for the civil rights movement. In the 11-year period between 1957 and 1967, he traveled over 6 million miles, spoke over 2,500 times, and appeared wherever, and I quote, there was injustice, protest, and action. Right when the civil rights movement was at its strong point and peak, the infamous March on Washington took place. On August 28, 1963, more than 200,000 Americans gathered in Washington, D.C., and many more hundreds of thousands watched the march develop on television. Here, many members of the civil rights movement spoke, and Martin Luther King presented his everlasting "I Have a Dream" speech. Another incredibly influential individual who had very contrasting ideals compared to Martin Luther King's ideas was Malcolm X. Though they both had the same common goal, which was equality for blacks and minorities, they had different ideologies. Instead of King's peaceful protest, which Malcolm X became extremely frustrated with, he believed in fighting back and growing black power. In addition, he believed in race separation instead of King's race integration. After his assassination on February 21st, 1965, many Americans began to lean towards more violent forms of protest and retaliation. Instead of peaceful protest, people turned to more violent methods of protest. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is a historic civil rights law that is meant to ensure that the right to vote is not denied on account of race or color. When President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, he permanently broke down many of the barriers which stopped minorities from having a say in American government. As a result, all could vote, and though all were not viewed as equal, the black community, along with the rest of the minorities in America, had taken a huge leap towards an equal, brighter future.